This is the Mosque of Selin at Edirne in Turkey. It was created by Sinan in the 16th century. O'Reilly gives you an interior shot, figure 224, but because it is representative, it's really one of, if not the most superior masterpiece of Sinan's architectural work that I think we need to look at it on the outside as well. The style that Sinan develops comes out of the work that he did when he was in charge of restoration on the 6th century church constructed by Justinian in what we now count as Istanbul. And that church is as Hagia Sophia. It's one of the most famous churches in Christendom, and it is highly influential for Ottoman architecture. And we'll get a chance to see a couple side by side views shortly. But it is essentially the formula on which Sinan is going to work. And also, I think he's seeing the early church as a challenge. He hopes to surpass the skill of the architects of that early 6th century church. This mosque was constructed for Selim II, also known as Selim the Drunkard, who was the son of Suleiman and Roxolana. Due to an intrigue instigated by Roxolana, I think I warned you about this woman, Suleiman was forced to order the murder of Mustafa, his favorite and older son, who was strangled on Suleiman's own command, leaving Selim, who was produced by Suleiman and Roxolana, as the heir apparent. However, Selim was not quite as skilled as a sultan as his father Suleiman. Nevertheless, he had under his command one of the most magnificent examples of Ottoman architecture constructed, and this is it, in a city known as Edirne, which is some distance from the main city of Istanbul. One of its most striking features are the four symmetrically placed, pencil-thin minarets that rise to 230 feet. One of the features of Ottoman architecture is minarets that rise to great heights and seem very thin, very finely tapered like these. They tend, in fact, to frame the centrally planned domed prayer hall, which we are facing. This Ottoman style piece of architecture is yet a third type of mosque design, and it is referred to as one that is centrally planned. By that, it means that in the very center of this, that's the place of action. And this represents the dome, but this is the area which is the main space for prayer. So let's start at the beginning looking for our traditional elements of mosque architecture. We enter, this is the main entranceway right here, and as we come in, we enter the courtyard. This is the ablutions fountain. The shawn or the courtyard provides us with an enclosed spiritual transition until we actually enter the place, the place of prayer. Once we are there, we clearly see the mihrab, which is located right here, which is set into the Qibla wall. You should also be able to find the four minarets, 1, 2, 3, and 4, located around the edges in a very, very symmetrical way. Everything centrally planned, everything harmonious, and everything totally balanced with a very large dome in the very center and a series of semi-domes. And I think you can see the outlines here that give the sense of cascading movement that comes down from that central dome. This is a floor plan that is repeated with variation in other examples of Ottoman architecture. There is a clarity of form in Ottoman architecture, and as I said earlier, a quality of being muscular, of being strong and powerful that simply is a part of the Ottoman architectural vocabulary. This is the interior of the Mosque of Salim. And again, I would argue that there's a clarity and a strength of form, a clear separation of the parts that is typical of Ottoman architecture. It also has walls and the base of the dome. This is the base of the dome that we're looking at right here, pierced by a series of windows so that we have light penetrating the room, the interior space from all directions. According to tradition, Sinan presented his designs for this mosque to Selim, who was the sultan, and that original design had 1,000 windows. When Selim looked at the design, it said, he told Sinan that this was a rather greedy number and perhaps he should reconsider his design. When the mosque was finally constructed and unveiled, if you had the patience to count the windows, you would discover that there were 999. There are windows at the base of the dome, and you can get a look at those over here, which follow the design of Hagia Sophia, that early Christian church. There's a tendency when windows are used in this fashion to make the dome appear floating and lighter. Nevertheless, in Ottoman architecture, I still get a sense of solidity and strength and of power. That dome is 102 feet in diameter and it rises up to the height of 148 feet. So it does hover above our heads. Uh, and that is a part of Ottoman architecture that makes the interior space have a spiritual quality. Again, of course, there are no interior figures that are depicted, no humans, no animals, but we do get abstract decoration and the creative use of calligraphy, such as the ring of text that is circling the very center of the dome, and additional views of the windows. This is an interior set of shots. This is the mihrab. This is the minbar or the pulpit. What you can also notice in these images is that these mosque lamps hang suspended from the very tall ceiling down so that they can hover over our heads. And what they do is tend to mediate between the space of the upper ceiling and the space of us down below on the floor, making the interior vastness a little bit more user friendly. Images such like this, the interior dome and the windows surrounding it, with such order and harmony and clarity, to the Muslims inside who are engaged in prayer or simply quiet contemplation, this tends to reflect the order of God's universe and the expansiveness of it and of divine power. And I think the interconnection of all things. The abstraction of imagery takes away the temptation to focus on a single picture, such as you might have in a Christian church. So it's a very spiritual interior, very conducive to prayer. Let's end Sinan with a comparison between his work and his source. His biggest source for material in terms of design is the Byzantine Church of Hagia Sophia, which is located on the left of my slides. I think you can see some comparison with his work on the right. I do not have a shot that is the same view for the Mosque at Edirne, so I'm using Sinan's Mosque for Suleiman, which is located in Istanbul, which is pretty much the same view. You can see that the dome is located in the center and that there is a ring of windows underneath it. You can also see coming down from the circular dome, there are triangles which move the weight from the dome directly down to the piers, massive columns essentially below, taking the weight to the floor. However, the overall feeling of these two buildings is a little bit different. The Church of Hagia Sophia tends to be very mystical. The light comes in filtering off of the mosaic walls, which is, remember, one of the highlights of the Byzantine Empire. And it creates an interior glow and an otherworldly quality that tends to, I'm going to say, dismember the parts of the architecture. whereas the Ottoman structure seems to have greater clarity of form, greater solidity, greater strength. And I have to return to that word muscularity. It has a sense of being strong in of itself. That is characteristic of everything the Ottomans construct, and also a sense of, I think, sureness of form and clarity of structure. The Ottoman building also has greater clarity of the individual parts. They not they do not fuse as fully with the structure of the building, and they maintain their own integrity as we wander and look at everything within the construction itself. The differences here are partly due to the aim of the architects. The Byzantine architect was interested in engulfing us in a mystical experience. The Christian church on the left is a place where a miracle unfolds during the celebration of the Mass. This is an appropriate fitting for that ritual enactment and that miracle. The Ottoman architect, however, is creating a calm and contemplative space for communal prayer. It is without the complexity of the ritual that takes place in the celebration of the Mass, a very different environment needed for a very different purpose. We do, however, want a quiet, contemplative space that suggests the presence of Allah and the power of His being in creating everything.